Welcome to Blessed by Angels podcast. I am so excited to share with you a snippet from a previous session. Now, in this conversation, we really talk about. The session was incredible. There was so much added into that space. However, um, he wanted to get some information about relationships, and so in this channeling, we talk a little bit about soul contracts, along with foundational pieces. It's so easy for us to lose ourselves in the start of a relationship, or even if we've been in a relationship for a while. We tend to almost forget or take away some of those things that make us feel like who we are. And so in this session, we explore foundational pieces as well as this beautiful advice for someone stepping into a new relationship, or maybe someone feels stuck in a past relationship or in their current relationship. And so this is just beautiful wisdom channeled in, and I hope that you enjoy it. Welcome to the Blessed by Angels podcast. My name is Jenn Gilbreth. Ever since I was a little girl, I have felt deeply connected to the angelic realm. Over the years, I have dedicated my time and energy towards delivering messages from beyond. Yes, that's right. I talk to dead people, although I don't necessarily consider them dead. In many ways, they are much more alive than us in this physical realm. On this podcast, I will be channeling messages from Spirit. Whether you tune in each week for the new messages or feel like picking a message at random, this podcast is designed for Spirit to lead you to the messages for you here and now. These messages have changed the way I view and play in life. I hope that these messages can do the same for you.
Does anyone have any advice or any relationship advice for me for anything romantically? I went through a divorce this last year.
Yeah, let's check with that.
It's just probably one of the things that I'm just curious about.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for bringing that up. Okay, so the grandfather that was just talking, he is just a wisdom, like he loves to share advice. Like he's got so much wisdom inside of him. Not that the others don't, but almost like, when you like see a life coach or someone on the stage that's just like dropping all these truths. It
Yeah.
feels like he's got like that kind of a presence. Um, but I first see him wanting to just reassure you. He talks about soul contracts and how we each kind of like, even coming from the lineage of your biological line versus coming from his lineage, right? Like we all have these soul contracts that we come here to experience. And we have that with humans, like with relationships and friendships. Is sometimes we have these friendships that are very profound and then they don't last long, or there are some friendships that last a long time. And part of this whole information about soul contracts is that we don't always understand, or we don't always see the lessons in it or see why things happen until we're kind of pulled out farther from that. And there's also lessons that we learn in these soul contracts. And so I just see him first acknowledging that you guys definitely had a soul contract. And when you take time to reflect on, okay, what did I learn about myself? How did I feel connected to the world? Was I giving more than I was receiving? It's almost like when we can reflect back on maybe those losses of relationships, we can kind of see more about who we are because of it. And I see him just acknowledging that, like, you're not damaged, you're not a bad and wrong individual. And I also just see him saying that sometimes we lose ourselves. And if we don't know how to find ourselves, we get in this predicament of like, man, who am I? What do I want? Why did this happen? And so I just see him expressing that, like, part of your soul's contract in life is this energy of looking and reflecting on that, but also knowing that the more heart-centered you live and you focus on the things that are the most important to you, you can attract people and attract a new relationship that you don't feel like you have to give up part of yourself for their happiness and vice versa, right? In this human world, he says we put so much emphasis on having things. And that's also having relationships. It's holding on to things, even if they might not fill, or even if they might not be what we think that they should be, or we hold on to these toxic things because it's like, I don't want to be alone. I don't want to do this on my own. I don't know if I can. We pull ourselves away from looking at the lesson that we learned from that individual and then like setting that foundation so that we don't have to become reliant on someone. We can have them as an addition to our life, but not that we're dependent upon them or have them dependent upon us. Does that make sense with you?
Mm-hmm.
And so I just see him saying, like, there's going to be relationships that come in and out. Not that you have to be, married and divorced many times. He's not saying that. It's just like even taking time to reflect. What are the main lessons that I learned in this relationship? And did those serve me, as well as like maybe what do I need to learn for myself for the next one? And so I just see him saying that sometimes you have to really take a hard reflection to see those elements of us. But that's part of why we came here, to explore those contracts so that we could grow. And so I just see him saying, like, none of it is bad or wrong, and he doesn't hold any judgment in that space. And he also sees that your heart is still very tender about everything.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just see him saying this is a perfect time to really reflect. But also, like in future relationships, what feels really important? What foundational pieces make up who you are? And you know, maybe that's being outside, or maybe that's a specific, like being like physical in the body, or maybe it's going on road trips, or whatever that looks like. But when you can get to know yourself at this time, he says, of what foundational things make you feel the most like you. And then you can find someone who also has their foundational pieces. And maybe it's like when you're talking to people, it's like, well, what do you think? Like, what foundation pieces make you feel the most like alive? Like, what's really important to you? And instead of having to give up foundational pieces for you or for them, it's like if we could both have our own foundation and we know what those pieces are for each other, we can honor that and grow together versus try to force them to have the same foundation that I have.
Mm-hmm.
No relationship is going to be sturdy or supportive if that's how the viewpoint is. And so I just see him saying that, yeah, it's been a tough lesson. It's also like really tender on the heart. And I just see him saying that, like, there's a lot of soul contracts that people have, and you guys had a soul contract, and now it's time to reflect, if you choose to, what good pieces of myself were brought out and what negative pieces were brought out, and really look at that and not be afraid to explore that. Otherwise these things can keep patterning up inside of us.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's really like, what's your foundational pieces? What makes you feel alive? And how can you not give up those pieces of yourself for a new relationship to come in? And
Right.
so I just see him saying you're in a really beautiful space of self exploration right now. And it won't be forever thing. And also, it can feel lonely at times. And there's a lot in that. And so I just see him saying there's a lot of potent medicine that's showing up for your soul right now. But also, you will find someone who has that respect and vice versa of this foundation.
Mm.
What are your thoughts on that? Can you picture that in your mind?
Yeah, I think that's actually spot on. In my last one, it was, temporarily, I think you meet somebody and you're willing to give on certain things that you enjoy doing in your free time. And what I think I've found in that is that's just a temporary thing, but eventually who I was as a person, what I wanted to do, always came to the top, even if it didn't originally. I thought it's okay. I don't have to do that. It's not that important to me. But over time, I started to want to do that because that's just who I am, or the hobbies that I like to do.
Yeah,
And then when that did come, then the other person's like, "What? You never liked doing that." But I did. I just put it on hold because I put them in front of my own needs, kind of thing. You know.
totally. And we all do that
So it's like,
in
well,
one way or another, right?
So it was a temporary fix, but eventually I just am who I am, and that's what I like to do. And that's what started, I think, causing a lot of problems.
Hey there, I wanted to take a brief moment to thank you so much for listening and being a part of Blessed by Angels podcast. I have found that our angelic team wants to help remind us who and why we are earthside at this present moment. The more that we remember the angelic support that we are given, the easier it is for us to live life to the fullest. So if this message or any of the previous messages from the podcast have really stuck out to you, I would encourage you to send them to anyone who you feel could benefit from the messages. Or if you feel prompted, I would love for you to leave a review on any of the platforms that you are listening on. I would love to hear your feedback. Blessings.
Yeah. And so him even saying like, maybe there's 5 foundational pieces or 4 or 6, right? What are those things that are you, that make you feel like you? And when you can anchor those in and you can live your best life, not only that, attracting someone who is willing to accept those things in you, that you don't have to give up, right? There's so many times we lose our identity in relationships because we lose those sides of us.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just see him saying the best way to find someone who that doesn't happen again is solidifying that for yourself first, and then finding someone who's able to support those foundational pieces, even if it might not be theirs, and vice versa. If you, or when you get serious and it's like, well, what really makes you feel like, what are your foundational pieces of life? What makes you feel like you? And if it's something that you can't support, well, instead of going through this whole inner turmoil of like, oh, I'll try to, like, it's like either you support it or you don't, right?
Yes.
And so it's like, that saves a whole lot of heartbreak. Is like, do you support this? And if they're willing to support it, even if it's not theirs, then there's something to work off of. But if they're like, I don't support that, I mean, it's easier to walk away now than to be emotionally invested in something that doesn't feel
complete or
yes. Yeah. So I just see him inviting you, like, this is a perfect time of reflection. You know, who are you? What makes you feel like you?
Mm-hmm.
And then not having to give that up for someone else.
Yeah, that really resonates with me a lot. So that's good.
And yeah, and it's vice versa too. It's also you getting to know that person's things.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're like, oh, you know, sometimes people like are like, yeah, I want to play basketball, and that's a really big thing. And then when you start having kids and everything, it's like, oh, you forget about that, or you push it down, and then it's like, man, I miss that part of me. And it's like, okay, well, I'm gonna take time, and I'll take on the family role while you do that thing. But it's also being willing to do that for someone else as well. If they're feeling lost, like, I don't know why I'm feeling so anxiety or have depression, or I just feel so low. It's like, well, have you been feeding or strengthening your foundational pieces? And
Right.
it's like being able to support each other in those pieces of that make up who we are, right?
Yeah.
So I just see him wanting to just like kind of like place that into your space, just really sit on that, let new things come in. And sometimes foundational pieces change, sometimes they crumble, and it's like, okay, maybe it's time to find a different foundational piece that's going to make me feel more like myself right now.
Thank you for tuning in to the Blessed by Angels podcast. It is such an honor to deliver these messages from beyond. If you want to connect deeper to your angelic realm and the support team that you have, I have a plethora of resources on my website at blessedbyangels.org. And of course, I'll leave the link in the show notes. You are connected to the divine. Having divine connection is an innate ability that each and every one of us have. Before we came here, we were spirit. And after we leave this realm, we are introduced back into the spirit world. So having spirit-to-spirit conversations and knowings and understandings are innately and infinitely who you truly are. When we step into this body, we tend to forget. We are not separated from the divine. There is just a lack of remembrance. Thank you so much for being a part of this podcast, and I look forward to delivering more messages from beyond.